That kind of self-deceptive, self-destructive behavior is a perennial, permanent threat to your cognition. You're always susceptible to that foolishness. Which means we need processes that help to ameliorate it. You can't shut off relevance realization or you're doomed. So you need something that can increase the amount of insight you have, your cognitive flexibility, your ability to readapt, to refit yourself to situations. Now, what's very powerful about this is that across time, history, culture, environment, you see people coming up with sets of practices for ameliorating that self-deception and enhancing that cognitive fittedness. The name that's most usually used for those practices is wisdom. See, knowledge deals with ignorance, but wisdom deals with foolishness. Those are not the same thing. You can be very intelligent and very foolish, and there is no contradiction there at all. Now, what's interesting is I participated in the Wisdom Consensus paper from 2020 led by Igor Grossman, and we got basically all of the wisdom researchers in the world, either physically or virtually, into one room, and we hung out for a weekend and we bashed out a consensus paper about what we think are the important features in wisdom. The dominant feature is perspectival metacognition. What does that mean? This is the ability to take multiple perspectives, to be able to shift perspectives. Shifting perspectives is one of the most powerful ways. I'm using my glasses like my mental frame to get out of my mental framing. When I'm in a perspective, what I typically can't see is the way the perspective is biasing me. I can't also take on interests and goals that are outside my perspective. But if I can take on his perspective or his perspective, that I can then look through them back on my perspective. I can actually overcome misframing. We depend on the dialogue between us to generate the multi-perspectival ability that can enhance the collective intelligence towards collective wisdom. So you have cognitive orientation, you have opponent processing, and you have perspectival metacognition, being able to take multiple perspectives, all mutually interwoven together. Plato's famous metaphor of the navigation of the ship of state. How do we navigate that ship, which is itself a hyper agent in a world of hyper objects? How do we do this? I want to make note of an idea from Plato that Drew Hyland makes really clear in his really excellent book, Finitude and Transcendence. Plato's whole philosophy is designed to try to get you into a deep remembering, not just knowing the fact, like the world is round, but the deep remembering, like where you're engaged in it and making use of it. The deep remembering of finite transcendence, that we are finite beings. We are not gods. We are finite. We are bound to circumstance and fate in powerful ways. And if we forget that, we will fall into hubris. And so we have in the Greek tradition myths about hubris. Icarus as a classic example. These myths of hubris are designed to remind us that we are finite. But what was Icarus doing? Icarus was flying, transcending. But if we get too caught up in our transcendence, we will fall because we're finite. But of course, if we just give into our finitude, then we will be subject to despair and servitude. We also have to acknowledge our capacity for transcendence. And so we have hero myths. The hero myths are designed to remind us, encourage us, enable us to engage in transcendence, to break the frame we're in, leave home like Luke Skywalker, go out, introduce variation, and then select the task that needs to be done, and then bring it back. Do you see the relevance realization machinery at work there? And you've got the opponent processing between the myths of hubris and the myths of heroism, and they're constantly keeping us remembering if we pay attention to them, and of course we don't anymore. If we pay attention to them, they give us the opponent processing that gives us the meta-optimal grip on our humanity, that we are finite transcendence through and through. You can see the myths as enacting relevance realization on the collective intelligence of distributed cognition, trying to educate us into wisdom. Brett Anderson, my co-author on a recent paper, has actually proposed this argument in a recent publication. Now, of course, like all intelligence, the collective intelligence of distributed cognition is capable of foolishness. I'm proposing to you that we should understand democracy as opponent processing within the collective intelligence of distributed cognition that is trying to self-organize that collective intelligence into a more proper orientation to the world by having us deeply remember and enact our humanity, our finite transcendence. But there are ways in which the collective intelligence can be subject to self-organizing foolishness. The bullshit can overwhelm us. And are we not now in a world in which the bullshit is overwhelming us more and more and more? How can the opponent processing of democracy degenerate? Well, it can break down into polarization in which the emphasis on differentiation overtakes the opponent processing. Or it can break down in groupthink, in echo chambers and bubbles that overemphasize the integration. We lose the complexification that allows us to deal with the complexity of the world, and we stupefy ourselves into a kind of collective foolishness. When you have polarization, the opponent processing breaks down into adversarial processing. One side is trying to destroy at all costs the other. And the problem with this, of course, is that debate depends on shared orientation. If we do not have a shared normativity, we can't engage in debate. Groupthink also destroys the opponent processing because it reduces the multi-perspectival nature that is needed for collective wisdom. We're all thinking from the same perspective. We all have the same orientation. So either we don't have any orientation or we all have exactly the same one and the whole machinery breaks down. Now, Dewey had hoped, John Dewey, that the dynamical system of science, which is also collective intelligence running on distributed cognition, would save democracy. That dynamical system of science and the dynamical system of democracy, the two forms of collective intelligence, would also correct each other. The problem that is that both science and democracy right now tend to focus on the propositional level. We emphasize only propositional knowing. Propositional knowing is knowing that something is the case. It gives you beliefs and it's stored in your semantic memory. Your semantic memory is your knowledge of facts, like cats are mammals. There's no event associated with that, you just remember it. Now the problem with that, and this is my work with Dan on the rovers and a lot of 4E cognitive sciences, that's not your only or primary form of knowledge. Your beliefs are not the primary thing directing your behavior in that sense. If we mean by belief, the capacity to assert a proposition. A lot of your ability to navigate the world is actually based on knowing how to do things, not knowing that, but knowing how to do things, knowing how to walk around, knowing how to kiss somebody you love. This is called your procedural knowledge, and it gives you skills, and it's stored in a different kind of memory called procedural memory. You have another kind of memory, perspectival memory. It's your memory of episodes. It's called, like, you can't remember where you learned that 2 + 2 = 4, but I bet you might remember your last birthday. You can call up your perspective on a situation, what it was like to be you in that situation there and then. That's perspectival knowing. And that's about being present and properly connected. And it ultimately depends on your participatory knowing. The way physics and evolution has shaped you and the world so you fit together. Culture, evolution, gravity has shaped this floor so I can walk on it with my bipedalism. We fit together. It gives us our primary fittedness. And what's the point of all this? Why are you telling me about all these kinds of knowing other than propositional? Our culture's fixated on the propositional, on beliefs. We're in propositional tyranny. But here's what the research is showing. Most of the sense of meaning in life comes from the non-propositional kinds of knowing, because they are the ones that are properly connecting you, giving you that cognitive fittedness. The propositional sits on top, like the icing on the cognitive cake. All the non-propositional is where the meaning is to be made. Think about what happens in an insight. You can't even put into words what's happening in an insight. But in that insight, you connect. It's bright to you. You're alive. You're connected to the situation. Insofar as we have lost touch with the non-propositional knowing, and this is something Plato argued, we have lost touch with the machinery of meaning. Insofar as democracy also sees itself just within the framing of propositional tyranny, it will be unable to afford people the education of collective intelligence into collective wisdom that enhances our religio. I use that term deliberately. Our sense of religio means to bind, our connectedness. But of course, it's the etymological origin of religion, a sense of importance, of value, of realness.